Thursday. I just wondered, do we take the exam today or on Thursday?
Probably Thursday. I'll try to coordinate with 3-4 students. So,
I'm so sorry because I forgot my jacket today, so I feel a little bit sick. So I might have to leave early today.
No worries. No worries at all. Sure.
The only way. Yeah. The one after actually, like I'll have to supplement with whiskey teas.
My brother about it, and I was like, you know, whiskey teas are 35, 37 milligrams cool for 9 because it's funny, I've seen people drink like 25, 30 twisted teas in a single night, and then I'm like, I cannot fall asleep now. It's because it's basically like, it's like 10 for low. More low actually used to have caffeine.
Yeah, used to have
like 140.
Used to have one. The entire like bottle of wine. They were called Four Locos because they had enough. They had the same amount of alcohol as 4 beers.
That makes sense.
Dude, Prime 4 Loco was a war crime.
It actually makes me so sad.
Why does it actually so you?
KSI never pulls finances better.
Have you invested in Prime?
No way, man.
Bryce got stock at lunch.
Yeah.
I need Mr. Beast for my lunch league, you know. Are you serious?
I do feel a little bit bad when I see these YouTubers invest like millions of dollars into making a product that just completely flops.
I want to see Mr. Beast get 100 CS waivers.
Have them all fight for one
Just see what
internship.
happens. See what happens. Oh, is everyone looking up Anthony Richardson because he tapped out last week?
Probably.
That's so funny.
Yeah. They're like, how's that in college?
And Joe Flacco's sick.
He's like this lazy like generic Canadian coach.
Anthony Richardson is literally our age, which is insane to me that he tapped out of an NFL game. But that's like it means he did a second down, and they had a third down, and he was running around a bunch. He was like,
Do I think he's supposed to?
I can't play this down. I'm too tired. And he's their quarterback, bro.
I think sports more for me when I went to my friend's birthday party in like 4th grade, and we were playing football. His uncle was supposed to play with us, and he would slam me so fucking hard. No, I literally got up. It was my first time in my life ever being winded. Never happened. I actually thought I was going to die. I was like, oh, my lung collapsed. Like, this is it for me. And I called my Josh and I know I love her. It was fucking 9 years old.
Probably felt like such a bitch.
I was 45 years old, sweating like an actual elementary schooler. I am the man.
This is my future.
Oh, God. I hope you're not getting any elementary schoolers.
Any questions about homework? Midterm, please, let's not discuss it. There is, show me hand, how many people will still want to take the midterm from our subset here? You want to take it later? 1, 2, oh, okay, there might be another person I will check on Piazza. So will it work for you to take it after and Thursday into the evening? It's too late after class? Thursday, yeah. Thursday is from 6:13 until midnight, whichever. That, it was long. Yeah, I mean, whatever was the time, and I'll change. It's not the same exam, but there will be, of course, recycled parts. Yeah.
Could we potentially have until Thursday to turn in part 2 of homework 4?
Okay, sure. I don't care very much, but what do you have? What do you have on the homework? Let's talk a bit about the homework that was. What did I ask you in the homework? Just remind me.
Squares.
Squares. Yeah.
Yeah, there were a number of edits to the question. There were some
What?
conflicting
So
definitions.
yeah, let's. Yeah, I wanted to define concave. Yeah. So the question with the squares, now with the figures and all the extra explanations, do people need me to discuss it, or do you at least feeling comfortable about the question itself? We'll get today so plan for today is to talk more about approximated Voronoi diagram, and I don't have broad grasp to how long it will take. Briefly to talk about WSPD, and because it's so cool, and then to talk about one of the classical topics that are with us from every course in computational geometry about motion planning and robotics, and Minkowski sum, and that would be very cool, but in a much simpler way. Like the approximated Voronoi diagram is definitely harder to grasp, and the motion planning would be just cute and nice, and everybody will understand for sure. About the homework, do you have any question besides the deadline? Okay, yeah.
There's a question about the wording that I'm a bit confused on. So it says the boundary of U is denoted by partial U is defined as a point P belongs on.
So let me try.
Okay.
Here are two squares. For these ones, I use two names that you can change interchangeably. It's either a corner and or a convex vertex. Convex vertex. Every vertex that is of one of the original squares. But let's talk about this question a bit. This will be a concave vertex. When I published the homework, I used vertices to denote only one type. Now there are concave vertices and convex vertices, and they are both legit vertices. And you want to essentially to prove that the union of them has linear complexity. And for this, they need to be squares. They don't have to have the same size. It's convenient for the proof that they have the same size, but that's not necessarily. But they have to be squares. Because how many vertices will I have them if they are still axis parallel but rectangles? If I want to generate a lot of vertices. And they are all on the union. And I wanted to remind everybody, and it involves a bit calculus, what is the boundary of the shape. So the boundary of the shape is, of course, everything that has, if I'm just looking at this point, this is inside the shape, this is outside the shape, and no matter how close I am to the shape, for every epsilon, I can find some region around it. In Hebrew, the exact expression in calculus is that you can, for any epsilon as small as you wish, and of course, somebody in my institute was very proud to compute the value of epsilon. That's a geeky joke. So that's a point on the boundary. If I have a few squares, like here is one that is completely embedded in the other, it doesn't contribute anything to the union. Why I'm so obsessed about the union, you'll see actually today when we'll talk about robotics, and the union will say, here are the regions that my robot can move safely, and below it, it will hit the obstacles. That's why the boundary of the union is exactly where I have the border between legit movement versus one that caused crashing between my robot and obstacles. So this vertex is not interesting because it's not on the union. This vertex is not interesting because it's in the union. P over here, not interesting. Q being on the boundary of the union is interesting, as well as, let's have another one, W1 and W2 that are on the boundary of the union. So, yeah.
I thought all the squares were unit
The squares are unit size for the proof. And actually, if you want questions that it's not hard, using the same technique, you can actually prove linear bound, even if they don't have unit size. Just the counting method is a bit more careful, but it's the same thing. And the counting method says, I want to charge every vertex on the boundary of the union, I charge it into one corner. And I want to show that the corner needs to pay for it, and the corner might need to pay for more than one vertex on the boundary of the union, but it will not pay for 1,000. Which brings us to the next question. Now, still with respect to the original question, there is a strong correlation here between the how many vertices do I have on the boundary of the union and the running time of line sweep. Because if I just do a line sweep and want to compute something, at least I need to have an event per every vertex on the boundary of the union. I might have a vertex also for things that are not on the boundary of the union that are like a wasted event. But the algorithm that you want to use in this question is that I computed the boundary of the union of S1 ... Sn half. That's the boundary of the union. It doesn't need to be connected. It can have holes and holes inside the holes, and it can be more complicated than just one path. But that's for the first set of rectangles. Here is a boundary of the union of Sn half plus 1 all the way to Sn. So I already computed the boundary of the union of the red. I computed the boundary of the union of the black. And now I want to compute the boundary of the union of everything. I want to know what is the boundary of the union of everything, which implies every point that is either in the first subset, the red subset, or in the black subset. That might be a vertex that I'll need to pay time for if I'm using line sweep. But I also need to pay time in the line sweep for bichromatic vertices, which are the combination of one edge that is red and one edge that is black in this case. And what I want in the end is to know what is the boundary of the union of the whole thing. Roughly speaking, that's the boundary of the whole creature, the union of all the red plus all the black. And how do you do it? By line sweep. But that's if I already computed the union of the first n half and of the last n half. How do I compute the union of each such subset? Being in computer science, the answer is, of course, recursively. So each such subset, I'll have to compute the boundary of the union. Now, how can I bound the running time? I'll show how many events there are. How can I show how many events there are? Because I know that the boundary of the union of the whole thing, let's say, events at the end, are limited to how many events do I have. I have vertices that are black. I have vertices that are red. But I know that there are about n half many blacks and n half many reds because of the boundary of the union. And I have also new vertices that are bichromatic, but to whom do I charge them? To the union of the new set that I'm just created, and I know what is the complexity of this set. It's a constant times n. So the whole thing will be, if we are not careful, it will be n log square n. And if we are careful, we can save one log, but let's not waste time on it. Yeah.
I just walk along the convex hull of one shape.
It doesn't
and then
need to be
hop onto
convex.
The next one when
It doesn't. You can do something like this. It doesn't need to be convex, and it can have multiple connected components.
Right.
But yeah,
I mean the
I see.
the boundary. Yeah. I don't mean convex stuff. Yeah, I mean
Yeah,
the boundary.
And back to my question over here. So yeah, you can save logs. You cannot get it to linear time, but you can save. Naively, it will be n log square n. Not naively, it will be n log n. Let's not worry about it. Let's decrypt this notation. That's partial, meaning it's a boundary of the union of the set Ri. That's just shorthand of R1 union R2 union dot union Rn. So I'm looking at the union of n a set of rectangles, and I'm asking how many vertices will they have on their union. In the worst case, I want to create as many vertices as possible.
Isn't that part B, you said less than 8n? Still apply for rectangles?
It will not apply for rectangles.
You won't? No.
And to make it simpler, they're all axis aligned. Everything is axis parallel. So obviously, it cannot be more than n squared because a rectangle has 4 sides. So I have 4n many segments. How many intersections there could be between all these segments? You know, it's no more than order of n squared, but what's the lower bound? Don't worry about constants. The function of n, asymptotic complexity.
Is the lower bound just n? Assuming no
Well,
intersections.
what is the worst case law about it is if I want to create a equation that shows that it's more than n, like significantly more. Like it's obvious n is, or 4n is of course puts a rectangle just as squares. But can you get to much more? And what confuses you, that's the reason that people don't solve it exactly. You're thinking about the complexity as a union, and you expect the union to be a connected part. But if I put 4 squares as so, where do I have vertices of the union? Here I have this little square is not inside any of the squares. So these 4 vertices They are on the boundary of the union, as well as these ones. They're also on the boundary of the union, and the union is now defined for one path on the outside, one path on the inside. So that was with squares. Can you make it much worse? So, but for rectangles, you can make it much worse, like much higher. Nobody? It's not hard. Just.
I thought I tried that. It was like 1 + 2 + 3 + 4 +. It depends on how they overlap.
If they are rectangles, they can. But usually when I look for lower bound, what I usually do is just assume about 2 sets, and let's just not worry about each set independently. Let's consider the 2 sets. Call it once, call it twice, yeah.
Is it also n squared?
It is n squared because
It's higher than n.
let's so I'll use segments. How many vertices do I have? N squared, n half horizontal, n half vertical segments. And now I may take every segment and just make it a bit, giving it a bit width. Agree? So you see that on the outside face there are n vertices, but there are also a lot of vertices in all these n square many holes that you are creating right here. There are n square many holes, so there should be at least n square many vertices, up to a constant. Cool? So that's why rectangles are good, and that's why squares are good and rectangles are bad. So in general, you'll see a lot of work that talks about realistic input model, and in particular, as I mentioned already, that we like fat triangles. Fat triangles are like much better for us, rather than thin triangle or thin rectangles. So that would be n square, and here, what happens to my charging scheme? Our charging scheme wanted to say that on the corner of this rectangle, I'll put, say, $2. And if I see a vertex on the boundary, I'll walk around until I hit the corner, and from the corner, I'll fetch the dollar and put it on this vertex on the boundary. And for squares, it's fine, and $2 will be sufficient. Well, if I try to do the same trick with rectangles, then I should walk from here, walking up and hit this vertex, but I'll also walk from here and charge this poor corner, and walk from here and charge this poor corner again. And one corner will be actually charged n times rather than only n, and that's why this charging scheme doesn't work. Okay, so now you know about union of squares. And and in general, for things, once you've proved a bound on the complexity of the union, it naturally implies that you can build the union with roughly the same running time. Like we'll show complexity of pseudodisk today or on Thursday. Back to our approximated Voronoi diagram, if we are done with the homework. I'll remind you where are we in this material. We wanted to construct approximated Voronoi diagram, or at least to answer approximated nearest neighbor queries, which means you give me your favorite epsilon, say 0.5, and when you give me, you'll say here are my points, P1, P2, P3, and so on. And you'll give me now a query point Q, and I'll tell you that the nearest neighbor, approximated nearest neighbor, is P1. And I'm lying, of course, because the actual nearest neighbor is P3, but the distance from Q to P1 is comparable up to 1 plus epsilon to the distance from Q to P3. So given your epsilon tolerance, I'm giving you the right answer. It's almost approaching nearest neighbor, up to this multiplicative error. And help, why do I not use the exact Voronoi diagram always?
It scales really badly when you go up in dimensions.
When I'm going up the dimensions, it goes exponentially in n and d. Something will always go exponentially in the dimension, but that's much worse than n to the d is really bad. Like n to the d is really bad, n to the d half it's also very bad. N times epsilon to the minus d would be much nicer. Epsilon is. As I mentioned, what we are describing is quite practical, or variants of it are quite practical for up to 20, 30 dimensions, which you cannot definitely hope to get with exact Voronoi diagram. Okay, and what was the idea? We said if my query point is very, I'll assume polynomial span, namely the distance between the two closest points versus the distance to the most furthest away point doesn't grow exponentially with n. It can grow with n, the smallest distance versus the largest distance, it can grow with n, but only as n to the some constancy. What does it imply? It can imply that when I have my query point, I have two extreme cases that we'll handle separately. If Q is less than 1, let's say that the smallest distance between every data point is 1. 1 is the closest distance between any pair of data points. So if the distance from my query point to any of the data points is less than 1, I'll handle it with one data structure that is separate. That's just the hash table that we already saw for the grid. If my distance is much larger than the diameter of the set, the distance between the two furthest away points, if my distance from Q to any point of my data set is larger than the diameter, then up to the 1 plus epsilon, what did we say? Just reply any of the points of the data set. They are so far away that you are fine. The data structure that we need here is for the cases that we are not extremely close, we are not extremely far. And how did it go? It says I can grow, here is Q, sometimes it's big Q, sometimes it's small q. I can grow balls uniformly, they are all of radius 1, say 1 plus epsilon, which is just 1. All of radius 1. Is Q in any of the disks? No, they are all of radius 1, and we said that I already handled the case that Q is of distance 1 or less from any of the data points. So Q is now not in any of the disks, and now I let all the disks grow simultaneously. They are all becoming larger and larger, the balls. And the moment that one of these balls covered Q, voila, that's the nearest neighbor. That's exact nearest neighbor. But building these balls and keeping them with all the time will also be exponential size. It's actually just as the Voronoi diagram. If you think about it in 2D, if you remember our diagrams with the cones that emerges from the points, that's exactly these cones that you see just in higher dimension. So that by itself is nice conceptually, but didn't have much. Our next step was to discretize. Since I'm not asking who is the exact, but I'm asking for the 1 plus epsilon, let's notice that if I start when the smallest disk is of radius 1, and next disk is jumped to the previous disk times 1 plus epsilon. And that it would be 1 plus epsilon squared will be the radii of all the disks. So it's now all the family of disks that are of radius 1 plus epsilon squared, 1 plus epsilon cube, all of them, and so on. So I have these families of disks, guys. Concentration, families of disks, they are all growing all at the same time, the same weight, nothing weighted. And now I'm asking for the exponent is an integer, 1 plus epsilon to the I, just this discrete set. You noticed that the largest exponent that I need to consider, is just logarithmic in this span, distance, diameter divided by 1. After log n many disks, or if you think about it, very few disks, and even though this 1 plus epsilon, we said epsilon is 5%, 10%, well, after log n many disks, you get to the maximum distance that you need to get. So now your question is just, in this family of disks that are all jumping discretely, at which time do I have one of the disks that covers my point? I still don't solve exactly this question, but at least instead of continuous going disks, I have a discretely going disk and much fewer critical radii. Yeah.
So you mentioned weighting some of the points. Would that be like a linear growth to how fast the disk grows?
I don't know how to make it works for if they don't grow in the same rate.
Okay.
So,
yeah.
That's why it's approximate, right? Because you could have multiple solutions and one epsilon number,
forget that I said weighted. Nothing is weighted here. I never mentioned the word weighted. But it's approximated still in the sense that here is Q, and Q might be just almost equally distant from all these points. And I don't really tell you who are the nearest neighbor, but I tell you that my multiplicative error is not more than 1 plus epsilon.
They fall in the same hash number. They fall in the same bucket as how far they are from the...
Exactly. So notation-wise, B sub 2 would be the set of disk, it's boldface B, set of balls B, each one at one centered at one of the data points Pi, P1 dot Pn, and the radius is, that's a 2 here, the radius is 1 plus epsilon to the power 2. B1, same thing, just the radius is 1 plus epsilon. And notice that's just normal B, and that's boldface B. It's a set of disks, all of the same gradient. B3, so B0 just use radius 1, and B3 is of radius 1 plus epsilon cube. And it's a good message in life that many things, multiplicative error is what you really want much more than additive error. Like if I'll ask you to go to a different different supermarkets than you're used to, and I'll tell you go to a different one that is no more than twice the distance that you used to go, then it's probably fine with you, because, or at least it's more fine that I'll tell you than additive error. I'm trying to say that your concept of small or large, as Einstein said, it's always relative to something else, and in terms of our concepts or our understanding of differences. Our senses, you know, in graphics we play with this a lot. When you are referring intensities, there are ratio between the intensities much more than the delta additive value between them. Like, okay, I shouldn't have kept this value. Okay, and that suggests the algorithms. We have Q. We are asking, is Q belongs to any of the small disk of radius 1, capital B? If not, only then we are moving to the disk of radius 1 plus epsilon. If Q is still not in any of them, then is Q in the disk of radius 1 plus epsilon squared. And as long as Q is in any of them, Q might be in a few disks of the same time, but which one do we respect as the nearest neighbor of Q doesn't matter. All of them are approximated nearest neighbor, and remember that when these disks were just by 1 plus epsilon smaller, none of them covered Q, so they're all roughly of the same distance, up to the 1 plus epsilon. So just to make it formally, if Q is not in the ball, sealed ball, centered at A prime of radius R, Q is not covered by this ball, but Q is covered by the ball. Q is not covered by the slightly smaller ball, but Q is covered by a ball whose radius is the same times 1 plus epsilon. Then what is the distance between Q and A prime? It is approximately this radius plus minus 1 plus epsilon. Okay. So that's by itself still is not the algorithm. So yeah, we went through this. Summary, we are just looking at this union of disks, but I prefer not to have the disk exactly. Instead, I will think about a grid. All the disks are of the same size. I separated the small disk from the a bit larger. Each one is a separate family. Here are a few disks, all of the same disks, all of the same radius. R is 1 plus epsilon to some I. Okay, and now I'll just snap them to a grid whose side is R, this R, times epsilon. So the moment that I have a grid cell that intersects the disk, I'll say that that's inside the disk. And I'm lying, of course, but by no more than the diameter of the cell size, which is epsilon. So if I'll say at this moment here, if I'll say for P4 that doesn't move, AP4, I can argue that where my finger is radius R away from P4 because it intersects the grid cell. I'm lying, but the actual distance from where the point is to P4 is R times, it's R to make it to the cell plus epsilon R to make it from one point of the cell to the other point, making it R times 1 plus epsilon. And if I need to have one scheme of approximation that gives me an error of epsilon R, and then another scheme of approximation on top of it, right? We had one scheme that the disk only go in jumps, introduce already R epsilon, R error, and on top of it, I have another scheme that I snap it into the grid side. It gives me 2 epsilon R error to the actual distance, which relatively, because I'm already distance R, then it's R divided by R plus epsilon, it's 1 plus epsilon grid. How many grids intersect a ball? Even if I keep all of them, in 2D it would be 2 is a value. If the disk is unit size and that's epsilon, then horizontally you'll have at most epsilons R cells. Maybe 2 epsilon horizontally and 2 epsilon vertically. And that's definitely a place where you can save, but that's also a place that grows unpleasantly with dimension. Instead of just 2 over epsilon square, then if you're going to 3 dimension, it would be 2 over epsilon cube. And yeah. Okay, so let's summarize the algorithm. These are new slides. You didn't have them uploaded them today. So here I'm building my data structure. And let's remind everybody that I had a hash function, age of when the grid size is epsilon, that is R equal 1, and I have some value epsilon. Then I have my grid size, where the edge length was epsilon. And to given a point Q, or a cell, I used the hash function that took for Q, which is X y. I hashed q. The hash function of q was the hash function of what? Takes the x divided by epsilon, takes the flow, takes the y divided by epsilon, takes the flow. This and this gives me the index of the cell that q belongs to. Remember this point? If this was 0, 0, then the next cell was cell 1, 1, and given q, I can just jump with the hash table into the cell if I have this cell in the table, based on the, this little arithmetic trick that takes the x and y coordinates of my query point and spits out in which cell it belongs to. All I need to know is what is epsilon and which grid size I'm referring to. Yeah.
You have the number of intersection is 2 over epsilon, but if the circle doesn't line up to the boundary, shouldn't it be plus 1? 2 over epsilon plus 1 times 2 over epsilon plus 1?
Yes. It's 2 over epsilon plus 1.
Yeah, because if
plus
the
2.
circle is right in between.
I agree.
Okay.
It's done. Okay, so we have a lot of hash tables. Well, not a lot. We have log n hash tables that we are using here. We build, so we have the two extreme cases of that the point is very close, or the query point is very close, or the query point is very far. So one grid gamma 0 of edge length 1, remember 1 is the distance between any pair of points. Each grid stores all the point of S, which are a distance 1 from any point of C, the closest point of C. And why am I saying that every grid cell has to only store a constant number of points? Constants that depend, yeah.
Every grid cell is going to be the same size, right?
Yes, so that's C, and its size is 1 by 1, and it needs to store P1 that is inside the grid cell, maybe another one, and it needs to also store P3 as long as this distance is less than 1, the distance from this point to P3 is less than 1, P4, P5, all of the distance 1 from the grid cell.
I think that since it's a square, we're going to have at least n squared points inside. And then to consider the ones on the outside, you just have to draw a bigger square.
Well, this is 1. The grid cell is 1. That's the smallest size. Careful, and it stores points inside. How many points can I have inside? You said n squared, but it's a bit pessimistic. Remember, the distance between every pair of points in S is 1. Minimum of P minus Q, we normalized it, where P and Q are data points in S, so this minimum distance is 1. So what was the argument that we used 2 weeks ago? It had a name of this type of argument. Let's take pictures of all of you so I know who is coming. I told you, from time to time I'll take pictures, just to know who is there. More frequent than others. Again, I don't need to know about every time that you're not here, but if you're out of something for a long time.
Found the spread or something?
Yeah, I think that it's just much faster than giving having a paper.
If every cell is a minimum, if every point is a minimum distance of 1.
Yes.
And the sidelines of the square are 1, then there could be at most 1 point inside the square.
Inside the square, I'll put roughly 1. I'm a bit lying about it because the diameter is 1, so is the edge length is 1, but let's decide that 1 is actually the diameter of the cell. Okay, so that would be 1. So I'm a bit lying. So the edge length is a bit smaller because the edge length would be, what is this? 1 over square root 2 and 1 over square root 2. Then now the grid, the diameter, the distance between the furthest away points of the cell is 1, which means that I can only stick 1 data point inside it. But what about points around? What was the name of the argument? How did we kind of say? Maybe I didn't tell you what the name. It was a packing argument. You have, if you're taking disks and the radius of every disk is half. Radius of every disk is half. Then, because the distance between P4 and P5 is at least 1, then this disk, half disk, are disjoint, like putting coins or quarters, and each one takes some area, but they're all distance 1, meaning that they're all using the area that you'll get if you go, say, 3 units away to each direction. We don't negotiate constants now. We just show that it's constant. So all these disks of radius 1, all these quarter, are all inside this larger disk of size 3 by 3, and each one takes, what is this, pi quarter square, and they are disjoint. So I can only put such quarters between them until, if I'm trying to put more points, then one of these quarters will try to go over the other quarters. Otherwise, I'm running out of area. So that's a packing argument. Okay. So that would be my first hash table. I didn't give it a name. The next hash tables are the interesting one. So I decided that k equal 1 and r I'll start when its size is 1 plus epsilon. And r will keep growing exponentially, multiplied by 1 plus epsilon at each iteration. And as long as r is not too large, I actually need to be a bit larger than the diameter of s, but never mind. You're building the grid gamma of k, gamma 1, gamma 2, gamma 3, but the grid doesn't really exist. All I need to know about the grid is what's the edge length. It's completely abstract. It has billions of empty cells that none of them interest me. What I care more is about the hash table T sub k, T0, T1, T2. T0 is for gamma 0, T1 is for the 1 plus epsilon, this larger disk. And it's a hash table that fits the larger disk in this figure. Its size is epsilon times this a bit larger size. And out of it, some cells are empty, and some cells, if they intersect the relevant ball, they said this ball intersect me. And if they intersect more than one ball, they still say the first one is the one that is relevant. I don't care even if more than one ball. But most of the cells, to be precise, all the cells except of at most n times epsilon, or what was it? 2 over epsilon plus 2 squared. That's a go 2 over here. So 2 over epsilon plus maybe. Noise is how many cells every ball intersects. The other ones are completely empty. So these cells we put into the hash table, into its relevant hash table. I have one hash table for the one unit disk. I have another hash table for the disk of radius 1 plus epsilon. Another one for the disks uniformly of 2 plus epsilon, and so of disk of 1 plus epsilon square. Another hash table for the disk of 1 plus epsilon to the 4. What does the cells ask? Am I empty? Then I'm not in the table at all. I don't need to insert it. If I intersect any of the balls, then the cell says I'll be in the hash table, and my auxiliary data would be what are the balls from which data points this ball arrived.
For saving the cells in the hash table, do we only need to save the newest order?
I can definitely save a lot of things. Here I'm just proving that it's at the end will be a linear space or n, or it will be linear in n in any dimension at the moment. Enough for me, and the query time will be logarithmic in any dimension. You can definitely improve upon it. Okay. So I have the log n, how many, right? That's how long I need to wait until the r, that grows by 1 plus epsilon, becomes larger than the diameter of S. And each time I build its own hash table, I'll give it the name k equal 1 to 3 up to log n, roughly, constant times log n. And let's see how do I answer a query. I'm just putting it together. We already know what's going on here. So the construction is the same construction. Just wanted to have it on the slides. Here is how I answer a query. The user gave me a query point, Q. I first go to the first hash table, T0, I didn't give it a name, that constructs the cells of radius 1. Now each cell, here I cannot play the game of just give me arbitrary disk. But because if I'm very close to one of the data points, if my query point Q is ridiculously close to P4, I cannot say, no, P3 is roughly the same distance. It's right. It's much larger than 1 plus epsilon lies that I can survive. I need to tell you, if Q is so small, I need to tell you that it's P4. So what's the trick? Q falls inside any of the cells. Check all the points in Q and all the points in the cells surrounding Q, or radius 1. Collect all of them. How many points did you collect around one cell that contains Q? You collected all the one such points because of our packing argument, and now check the distance from Q to each one individually. So that's like the slowest algorithm, but it works, but you're only checking the distance explicitly for a constant size set of data points. Points that are outside this big cells, not relevant. I don't worry about them. They are not handled at this step. And then you can check actually who is the exact nearest neighbor in this first case. What happens if the cell of radius size of Q is empty? Namely, the distance to the nearest point, nearest data points from Q is larger than 1. Then I start playing with families of balls. I'll try the smallest family of balls. Now I'm looking at T1, balls of radius 1 plus epsilon, is the cell that contains Q, the query point, has intersect any of the disk of radius 1 plus epsilon. If not, then wait one iteration, is a disk of radius 1 plus epsilon squared. 1 plus epsilon squared, that would be T2. And then T3, T4, all the way until T log n, until somebody says that my cell in the hash table contains Q, each one is a different hash tables that I'm looking around. T1, T2, all the way up to T log n. None of them, all the cells that contains Q, here is Q, all the cells that contains Q are in all the hash tables are all empty. Then what are we doing? We decide that the distance from Q to the nearest data point is more than the diameter, so just reply with any of the data points. The query here takes constant time. Constant when the dimension is fixed, of course. Exponents are the same thing, but doesn't depend on n. Query in the hash table takes constant time, the miracle of hashing. How many queries can I have? At most, log n. And actually, we saw it because it's binary search, right? It's only log n query time. Remember why? Because once the big disk contains Q, then any larger disk will even contain Q. So I can do binary search among these radii. to find the smallest disk, the smallest radius that finally contains Q. So, yeah. So that would be the query time. You have a slide for it. And the, wait. So, did I lost this slide? And the, yeah, and the memory that you need, compare, it looks big, but remember, it's comparing to n to the d half. So that's, what's smaller, it's linear in n. And if you can live with error of factor 2, let's say, you don't mind that you know approximately, with approximately up to factor 2. You just know this number, epsilon, is actually 1, so you don't feel it at all. So it's actually very practical data structure. Now, as long as you're modest about your expectation from epsilon. Okay, two very quick terms just to remind you, just to put it somewhere in your memory, not in the, really in the syllabus. WSPD, well-separated pair decomposition. What is well-separated pair decomposition? I had clusters of points, but I want to be a bit more accurate when I define what is a cluster of points. What do I mean the two clusters are different? Like, of course, I can run a clustering algorithm like Floyd algorithm that kind of do the clustering for me, but I want to be more, but what Floyd algorithm spits out can be quite arbitrary. So here is a more practical definition of what are the clusters. And when I'm looking at a cluster, I'm looking at the points inside the cluster a bit more closely, and they are not, even the point inside the cluster, actually I can partition them into subclusters, and each one of the subcluster I can partition into sub-subcluster, and you know, I can keep on splitting them all the way down. So here is an exact definition. You give me also so when I measure this quality of the distance, I can ask what is the distance between two sets, the cluster of A and the cluster of B. It is like, if I ask you what's the distance from Tucson to Phoenix, probably the answer that you should give is between, it depends where in Tucson versus where in Phoenix, but the distance between Tucson and Phoenix will probably be the closest point between them. I will try to get as close as possible. So the same here, the distance between two sets is a minimum between, take each point here and a point here, look at the minimum between the two sets, that's the distance between the red set and the blue set. The diameter of the set is just, look at all the pair of points, that would be the, and look at the maximum distance. That's the diameter, that's the distance. By the way, you want a quick algorithm to find the diameter, you can look at all the points, but here is a very cute algorithm. Just completely, by the way. Pick an arbitrary point. Find the furthest away point from the arbitrary point. Find the furthest away point from the point that you just had. Find the furthest away point from the point that you just had, and after 3-4 iterations, you're pretty much done. It's about 1 plus epsilon to the actual diameter. Surprising. So linear time algorithms that give you good approximation. Anyhow, everybody understand? Start arbitrary point. Look at the furthest away point from the first point, that would be called it P2. Look at the point that is furthest away from P2, called it P3. Look at the point furthest away from P3, called it P4. Distance between P3 and P4 would be a very good guess. Okay, what is WSPD? As usual, you'll give me your epsilon, and I'll say that there is a well-separated pair decomposition. If I can represent all the pair of points, how many pair of points I have? I have n squared many pairs of points, but I want to represent them somehow as sets. And don't ask me yet, how do I represent a set? I have some compact way to represent a set. But now I want to tell you that all my points consist of the set in this disk and the set of this disk, And say that these two sets are well separated, given the epsilon that you gave me. If you guess where it's going, I reported this set and this set as well separated, meaning that the diameter of each one is smaller than the distance between them divided by epsilon. That is, the distance between the sets to be well separated, these two sets should be small comparing to the distance between them. And what is too small, you control by epsilon. Make epsilon smaller, it means that they need to be really far away or really small, consider them. But now, each such set, after the first decomposition, I can go and break every such set into smaller subsets that should be well separated with the same condition. And each such set can continue up to the atom level, further and further down. So that's great. I can go into the level that all I will tell you are just pair of single points. Point here and point here. Point is very small diameter, just 1 point, whatever the distance between. So I can tell you all the n squared pair of points, but it's surprising that it's enough to only give you all the pair of points as a list of pairs, A1, B1, E2, B2, all the way till ASBS, list of such clusters. There is only linear number of such sets. It will be more clear when we'll see one application of such WSPD. But now, I was very mysterious about how do I represent a set. Like, if I need to tell you what are, so you'll have to think about all the points in A1 and then all the points in B1, and A1, B1 are, again, A1, B1, each one has small diameter comparing to the distance between them. They're really far away. So how can I represent it? By building a quad tree on all the points, and I'll just tell you a vertex here versus a vertex here, vertex in the tree, and then you'll understand all the points in this subtree versus all the points in the other subtree. They should be well separated when I'll give you this pair of points. Okay, and surprisingly, that's all you need. Just give me a list of vertices in the quad tree. What's the algorithm to find the well-separated quad tree? It was a Fox paper, and then Sariel gave a much simpler algorithm. They just ask, look at two vertices U and V in a quad tree. After you build a quad tree, of course, it can be a compressed quad tree. You remember what it is. And then every time that you see two nodes, you check the diameter of the two nodes. You check the distance between them. It satisfies, great. Otherwise, just recurse. And you're just doing it cleverly, and it's surprisingly, to me at least, it's only linear number of such sets. Okay, what does it WSPD good for? For example, yeah, let's just show you that you can do it with linear number of sets. Let's assume that I want communication network. I want to say I'll place wires between the sets, or wire. I want to connect, so here's a set of points. I'm in the plane. I want to connect all of them by a network, and I want this network to use very little gravel if I'm connecting them by road. Or I want to very little wires if they are connected by wire, and so on. So if I want the minimum length of wires to all these points, your obvious answer is minimum spanning tree. Minimum spanning tree is as little edge lengths as you can afford and still get everything connected. But now look at this set of points right here. Here is P, here is Q, and here are all the edges of the minimum spanning tree of this set, S. And I want to drive from P to Q on this road network, and you realize realize that even though P and Q are so close to each other, what I really need to derive is ridiculously larger comparing to the distance between them. So Spanner tries to say, and its global definition to every graph is, maybe you need to add more edges, but it would be nice to still have not too many edges. Like, don't connect every pair of points by a path. Don't create a road between every pair of points, because then the amount of gravel, asphalt, wires that you need to do will be extremely large. Of course, if I put a straight road between every pair of them, then no matter what your source and destination, your path will be just go straight along the edge. Very efficient, but it's very expensive. I want to balance it a bit. So a spanner would be such a road, probably more raw edges than the minimum spanning tree, but not much more, such as for every pair of points, Pi, Pj, look at the distance on them in this graph that I'm creating, this network that I create, shortest path between Pi and Pj, divide it by the Euclidean distance. The Euclidean distance would be the shortest distance that you can do if you can just fly, as a bird fly. Versus what is the distance if you're on the ground and use our trail system that I just constructed for you. I want this ratio to be close to 1. Makes sense? I'll add more edges to the minimum spanning tree, but I still want that the sum of edges that I'm creating to be 1 plus epsilon, that minimum spanning tree, and I want still that the distance from Pi to Pj would be roughly the best you can do as if you are on the ground versus if you can fly. Again, if you're using our trail system versus if you can fly, this ratio rho should be close. Okay, hopefully you got some taste of where I'm heading, but so that's what I want from a spanner. Good definition for definition at all. Stefan Koborov that left us worked on it for many years, and he said when you look at Google Maps and you kind of zoom out in Google Maps, you'll see that there is a basic backbone of the roads that you can see as you're zooming out, but the main roads give you a good hint to all the roads that are applied, right? You see only the main road, only the interstates, but the ones that Google leave on the map give you a good idea about what is a trail that you can do from every pair of points, because it's not the minimum spanning tree. You'll see the main road that will consist of the important, which will consist of good feeling about how do you traverse from a point to another in the map, even though not all the roads are in the map. You'll get a pretty good idea how to drive. So that would be the spanner application, and what should you do? What should I do? I don't have a slide, so let's just be quiet. So let's assume that that will be WSPD. So I have a lot of points from which some of them are in A, some are in B. I still didn't tell you, but you want to connect them somehow. And the roads that I'm going to connect, this network that I'm going to connect, is going to be close to the shortest path. Epsilon close. What should I do? There is points on A, points on B. Pick any point on A that you want, doesn't matter which one. Pick any point of B, data point, any one that you want. Take the road between them. That would be the only way to go from A to B. But now inside A, you see two clusters. Like let's zoom in. Then inside A, sorry. And inside A, zooming out, I see A1, A2, and A3. But these sets are well separated already. They are small compared to them. And remember, this point here in A3 in A2 is connected to B2. How do I connect A1 to B1? Say, pick this point, connects to any point that you want, and so on. So just between two clusters that are far away, it doesn't really matter which road you'll get. Just connect them by any edge, and eventually at the end, you are getting a nice pair. To get excited about it, you want to work on spanner before, and you see how hard it is to work on spanners in graphs in general versus how easy it is in geometric world. Okay, that was a complicated topic, and as I said, you can find it in, that's actually explained in Sariel textbook about the approximation algorithm, but it's, Sariel is, he doesn't leave any loose corners. Mount's book describes it, I think, in a much more digestible way. So if you read it only once, in Mount, a lecture note of computational geometry and algorithms, you'll find it beautifully, beautifully explained and much easier to. Let's start motion planning. We have enough time. Motion planning, one of the cutest topics, undoubtedly. I'm having a set of objects, obstacles, and I have an initial position and final position of a robot, and the goal is to find a path that a robot can track this path. There is also the robot that you don't see. A robot can follow this path and not hit any of the obstacles. That is, it's not only that the path needs to stay away from the obstacle, the whole robot along the path should never hit any of the obstacles. That is, avoid them at all times. So, but that's not the, a tail could be obnoxious. I'd still take it over PowerPoint, but so here are my robots. My robot, Roomba robot in this case. Actually, our robot most of the time will be my robot most of the time will be a polygonal robot, but let's play also with a disk robot. So I can move the disk robot, and I configure it based on there is a configuration space, that is, or the workspace. Every point where I tell you where the center of the robot, and right now my robot will be I'll just translate the robot. I don't worry yet about rotation. So only 2 degrees of freedom, X and Y. And I'll assign one point in the robot. Say for a disk, let's pick the center of the disk. And to tell you where is the robot, that is, what is a workspace, it's any location of the center of the robot tells me it's a location of the robot itself. By specifying the center, I specified where is the robot. Now, the robot is just a point, and in the workspace there is a forbidden space. Namely, when the robot hits any of the obstacle, it will leave, its center is red. Why the center is red? Because the robot as a whole intersect. So that would be the forbidden space, and the free space is just all the points where I can move the robot and it doesn't hit any of the obstacles. So again, to be obnoxious, that's all the location of the center of the robot for which no point of the robots hits any point of any of the obstacles. So blue would be I'm out, the robot is fully outside. Red would be a point where the robot hits any of the obstacles. And essentially in this space, I have a point S and T. Notice, of course, that the red thing is not only the obstacle, but it's like a safety bound around the obstacle that I cannot penetrate with the center. In this case, the robot is of radius 1. Then I cannot be distance of less than 1 from any of the obstacle without being in the red. So it's like a fattening region around each obstacle that tells me you cannot enter. And now, if I give you SMT, I'm asking either a path that takes you from S to T, moves the center of the object from S to T. You had this question with the Voronoi diagram, and the whole path is in the blue. But now, how do I find if there is a path that is fully in the blue? It's easier to do if we'll do a trapezoidal map. So I want to use basically BFS, DFS, Dijkstra, but here are my objects. And I want to find BFS, DFS, Dijkstra, whichever. In the space I have SMT and my obstacles, yet my robot now is just a point. It shrank from a disk to a point. And I want to tell you what is trapezoidal decomposition, which is similar to triangulation, trapezoidation, similar to triangulation, just simpler. How do I do trapezoidal map? So I have segments or objects, and they have corners. And from each vertex of each one of the obstacles, I'm going to shoot a ray down. From this guy, I'll shoot a ray down. From this vertex, I'll shoot a ray down. From this vertex, I shoot a ray down. But this ray doesn't penetrate the next object. Once I hit an object, my ray stops there. So I'm just becoming a segment that connects these two objects. This ray shoots down from this corner until it hits some object. This corner until I hit some object. That was shooting the ray down. And maybe I'll put some artificial object here as a floor, so the ray will not penetrate. That was shooting the ray down. In the same way, I can shoot the ray up from every corner, like so, from this corner of a triangle until I hit another object. And when I'm done, but again, I don't penetrate. The ray stops the moment that it touches one of the other objects, or it touches the floor or the ceiling. Infinity and minus infinity. And now I want to call it trapezoidal map, what I'm getting, because if you think about it, what do you have? You have now a set of trapezoids where my rays are only vertical, always vertical. It's much simpler than triangulation. My rays are vertical, meaning that the two right and left walls are parallel to each other, and the floor or the ceilings are taken from the objects themselves. So that would be one trapezoid, another trapezoid, etc. How many trapezoids you want to go home? How many trapezoids do I have, and how do I find them quickly? Like quickly, the algorithm needs to be quick. You don't need to answer quickly, but if you want to go home, you probably. How many trapezoidal I have if I have n object? Yeah.
Like 3, roughly n, because you shoot it from each vertex. So
each one should touch one of the vertices. Right, if I have n vertices, then each such trapezoid should use one of the corners, and this corner cannot be used for more than 2 trapezoids, something like this. So order n is the right answer. Use Euler diffusion. How do I find them quickly? How long do I give another guy a chance?
Line sweep.
Exactly, do line sweep. The more you have the surface, the more that you've got a vertex, shoot a way down, shoot a way up, and that's all you have. And now you have this trapezoidal map. You got it in n log n time. The only event are just the events. You just look at the status. Every vertex, who is the object just below me in status. Just successor and predecessor, above me and below me immediately. This will define the trapezoidal. And now if I just want to get from one trapezoid to another, it's not necessarily the shortest path for the robot, but a path will be go from one trapezoid, as long as you don't cross one of the obstacles, go from one trapezoid to another one, to another one, to another one, just for going through these walls because it's not real obstacles, until you get from S to T, or until you discover that there is no way to get from S to T. So trapezoidal map is just to find for a point robot either a path from S to T in n log n time. It's not necessarily the shortest path. We'll talk about shortest path separately. Then you need something called visibility graph. But that's much simpler. And that gives you